I said we will have a real cool time tonight. I said we will have a real cool time tonight.
Hello, I'm Cone from Sum 41. This is my show, Cone's Cave, right here on iDoby Radio. This is Season 5, Episode number 1. I'm back with Season 5, and I'm going to go heavy on the punk rock this season. I have a lot of great guests, pretty much already lined up, already done the interviews, and I basically all in the punk rock genre. So, if you like punk, this is your season. Tune in every Monday, because I'll be here for the next 8 weeks doing my show. This week, I have fellow bassist Scott Shiflett of Face to Face on the show. Scott has played in many bands, including Me First and the Gimme Gimmes, 22 Jacks, Viva Death, Jackson United, and the list goes on. He's been in punk rock a long time, and I will say the Shiflett last name got a whole lot more popular with his brother as well joining the Foo Fighters, I want to say, 25 plus years ago. Chris Shiflett, his brother, came from a band called No Use for a Name. Chris Shiflett, Scott Shiflett, both rippers, both amazing musicians. And Scott Shiflett, for me, is pretty much the best bass player I've seen live in this genre of music. I'm talking skate punk music. And he might not agree with me on that because it's him, but I will say I've watched a lot of bands in my life, and Scott Shiflett, for me, is pretty much the best bass player I've seen live in punk rock. I first saw Scott and Face to Face play in the year 2000, and Face to Face was the very first band to ever take Sum 41 across America. Face to Face saves the day, Newfound Glory, and the first band on was us, Sum 41, our very, very, very first American tour. And needless to say, no one knew who we were, including the bands that were on the bill. Scott was nice to us back then. He's nice to us now. We run into him from time to time in America. We played festivals in Japan together, Europe together. Just a great dude all around. This interview is probably about a year and a half old, maybe more, maybe 2 years old, but it's still relevant today because you get an insight into what I call the best punk rock bass player right now, Scott Shiflett of Face to Face. The conversation's coming up after this. All right, this is Cone's Cave. I'm Cone from the band Sum 41. How's it going? Thanks for tuning into my show, Cone's Cave, right here on iDoby Radio. I'll be here for the next 8 weeks doing Season 5, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Mondays. Make sure you tune in. Like I said before, I'm going heavy on the punk this season. Pretty much every guest I have is in the punk genre. And this week I have fellow bassist Scott Shiflett of Face to Face on my show. One hell of a bass player. I mean, if you have ever seen Face to Face play live, I don't have to tell you. You're watching him most of the time because he is a ripper on that bass guitar. Pretty much, like I said, the best bass player I've ever seen live in punk. So I want to show you the conversation I have with Scott. Here it is, my conversation with Scott Shiflett of Face to Face.
I want to talk about, the first thing I want to talk about with you is your early days, like a heavy influence of yours, like early on, something that maybe made you want to pick up the bass, maybe even start music.
The interesting thing about that is that it'll steer us pretty quickly out of punk rock, and I don't know how punk rock themed your show is, but
metal, punk, garage rock, whatever, indie rock.
Yeah. No, well, classic rock in my case, because I came up probably to this day, my favorite rock bass player would be Paul McCartney, followed close behind by Geezer Butler of Black Sabbath. And I know it's weird because a lot of people don't see how that would be, but I listened to a good smattering of punk rock in the 70s and the late 70s and stuff. But it was mostly that rock and roll inspired punk rock, like, the Pistols, the Jam, the Damned, and the Clash, that sort of wheelhouse. And though some of those bands had some, like the Damned had great bass lines, I think the Clash did as well.
Yeah.
The Jam, the best bass lines ever. Bruce Foxton is one of my all-time favorite bassists / punk bassists, and a big influence on what I do, obviously, along with Matt, since I had to step in his shoes. But, most of my real sink your teeth into type influences were guys like I said, Paul McCartney, Geezer Butler, John Paul Jones, 70s era Geddy Lee, a guy named Mars Cowling, who no one's ever heard of. These were like really, like, as a young bass player, I could listen to them and it was inspiring. And, the guys in Face would be remiss if I didn't say Gary Thane as well, because he's a guy no one knows about that fell off the radar in the mid 70s. But a great bass player with this sort of, a lot of those cats back then had this sort of almost Motown-y thing underneath what they were doing, even if they were playing like heavy rock. Like Gary Thane had a whole lot of James Jamerson, lurking in there. And it must be because they came up in the 60s and 70s when there wasn't a whole lot of bands like the ones they were in to influence them. They kind of got that stuff elsewhere, like a lot of walking bass lines and thumpy, boppy movement, and which had a big impact on me. So it's interesting because, it's not like I try to force that stuff into the scenario I'm in. It's just part of the palette that makes up my sort of approach and language. So all that stuff has crept into, Face to Face, as well as the more obvious driving Steve Harris type licks, which, though I dug the early Maiden records, I more or less inherited that approach by aping Matt Riddle, because on my own, I was more like a Paul McCartney or a Geezer Butler. But, stepping into someone's shoes, you kind of got to give the band what that person did in order to honor the material. And it's part of the tone, the legacy of the group. So, I like a lot of different stuff, and it's not like I'm, it's a stretch that much. But yeah, my influences definitely come more from the classic rock kind of era.
Yeah, what's great about you two as your bass playing is there's not a lot of people I can like hear a song for maybe like 15 seconds and be like, that's that guy playing. With you, I feel like I can do that because I know that you're a busier kind of bass player. So and I've been listening to Face for so long that I can hear it and be like, that's you. that's
well,
you.
It's funny you'd say that because there's been a quote for better or worse unquote element to that, because I've probably, most of the time I'm obviously using a lot of different gear for every record we've made. And yet every time I hear the playback, I'm like, yup, there I am. And, sometimes you kind of want it to not be that. You want it to, I hear other players sometimes and I'm just like, fuck, pardon me. I just let out the dreaded F. But I'm like, I love this tone, and, I might, excuse me, try and steer myself in that direction. Or how can I get a sound that has all the body and the fat, warm tone, but also that, edgy quality that's so cool. Like who's the guy from The Cure?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I always forget.
It'll come to me, but like Chris Squire of Yes, he had all the warmth and the body, but it had a lot of growl and grit, a lot of edge, which was something I really dug. But I'd always, I don't know. It's like I hear me and I go, there I am. How can I get something else sometime?
That's great though. That's like you have your own style. Like like when I hear Steve Harris play, I'm like, I know that's Steve Harris playing. And I think
right.
You have that.
Well, I appreciate that. It's there's the me in all of it, but it's also every flavor I've soaked up my entire life. It's I don't even consciously think about it. It's kind of funny. I know they get a lot of flack for being not necessarily the world's top musicians, but no, those early Kiss records, Gene was playing some really cool bass riffs, and they all were. I thought they played with character and personality, and to me that has always counted far more than chops per se. It's great to have some skill and some overhead, more overhead to express yourself. There's never a bad thing, but you should always just kind of be trying to say the thing and not let your expansive musical vocabulary dictate your sentiments musically. And I know there was what song is it? Oh, Nearly Impossible in the solo section. I totally throw in this Gene Simmons, and I didn't even think about it at the time. It just kind of came out, and then later we're listening to it on playback, and Trevor and I were having a real good laugh over that. I'm like, it's in there forever. You got some Kiss on a Face-to-Face record. Ha ha.
Was bass your first thing? Like, because for me it was like, but I just started being a bass player. But did you start with the guitar?
Yes and no. Here's the thing. I've got an older brother named Mike, who's a brilliant person in general, but definitely a massive influence on me and Chris, and really the wellspring of all this hands-on musicality in our family. Our parents obviously had the music they dug, but neither of them played anything, though they were both encouraging of us. It was definitely Mike that got his hands on guitars. So, before I ever owned a bass, there were guitars. We, had an acoustic Epiphone, and then we had some no-name thing my dad bought from Sears that he renovated. It was an electric guitar. You can see a picture of me if you deep scroll my Instagram page. It's Halloween 1977, and I'm dressed as Ace Frehley. I know my outfit doesn't resemble any of his actually outfits. As a young fan, that's shameful, but it is what it is. But the guitar I'm holding was the first electric guitar that we got. We got it sometime around 76, maybe 75 or 6. And we were able to plug it into the downstairs stereo system and blare that thing loud, but it didn't have distortion. It was just like a big, clean guitar. But, as kids, you're so enamored with that shape and with, the technology, the noise. You're discovering all these bands that are lighting you on fire mentally and motivating you. So it was just great to have and to mess with. So, I wasn't formally taking lessons, but I was, under the spell of my older brother, and there were guitars laying around the house. So I was, it actually started out with me picking up the guitar and pretending to play while my older brother played guitar. Yeah. Well, even before that, I cut out fake guitars and, jumped around the basement posturing with it to Elton John records and stuff. And so it was like a gradual thing. It was clearly an obsession from the get-go. But once we were living in California, my mom signed us up for lessons. And, it was like one of those things, like I didn't know whether I wanted to be a lead guitar, I know. It's funny to say it that way, or a drummer. I really kind of, in my mind, it was like, well, I kind of wanted both, but I wasn't fixated enough on either. And, it sort of came down to it. My mom said, all right, we're signing you up for lessons. What's it going to be? And in a sort of moment of not quite panic, but indecisiveness, I just blurted out bass. I'll do bass. And it was largely because my older brother was already playing guitar. I figured choosing a different instrument would get us closer to forming some kind of a group. And bass, I would sit and watch Mike play, and those 6 strings were confusing as all heck. I figured 4, how hard can that be? And that was it. So we signed me up for lessons at Jensen Music in Santa Barbara, where my older brother continues to teach. He, this was in the mid to late 70s through the very earliest of the 80s, maybe. I don't even think we made it through to 81 or so, but we were taking lessons there. I would go to my lesson and just pick a bass off the wall. They would just let me choose whatever I want that week. So, I'm still so young. I don't really understand what makes an instrument more quality than another. So one lesson, I'll pull an Aria Pro 2 down, and then maybe I'll pull a Kramer because it had that cool split V headstock. And then, I started fixating on the Fenders. I loved the jazz basses almost more than the P basses, Yeah. But I'd routinely pick a Gibson or something, anything, until finally It's sort of an interesting story, and it might be a little embarrassing to tell you. And sorry to steamroll through this interview, but you pulled a thread, and you're getting the whole story. There was a moment in, like, I forget, like junior high school, where my older brother Mike and I were being really bad. We were living with my single mom who was working full time. So kind of, I guess the expression is latchkey kids. We'd come home from school, but we were also, our hair's getting long. We're embracing this sort of like counterculture rock and its inherent values, and starting to screw off at school pretty bad. And I think that the die was already cast. We were both already kind of a little hit and miss with that. And we both started ditching school fairly regularly. And at one point, my mom was made aware of this, and she just flipped out. That she sat Mike and I down on the couch in the living room and proceeded to smash that guitar you see me holding in the picture, which was technically my older brother's electric guitar. But that thing, she Pete Townsend that thing over the fireplace like nobody's business. And we're sitting there stunned into silence as she drops the little practice amp on its side and stomps it to smithereens, or at least, stomps out the speaker cones, which was basically to smithereens. She was furious how bad we were screwing off and let it be known. And yeah, we were both shamed pretty bad. But, the upswing of this story was in a sort of spell of guilt. My mom replaced Mike's guitar with a decent guitar. It was a Gibson Les Paul knockoff. I don't remember exactly the brand. I think she got him that, and maybe also a Fender Strat, which was kind of a golden colored Strat, really cool Strat, sort of a late '70s Strat. They're much more appreciated now, I think, than then. But the upswing was I got my first bass, but my first actual bass, that lived with me at home, because I was always playing Mike's guitars. It was one of those things like he didn't want me to, but he didn't mind at the same time. He'd leave his room and I'd go in there, and he had this great Music Man, like 2 cabinets and a head, this Music Man something or other. And it had built in like flanger or something. Yeah. And I just loved the sound of that. I'd put that on and start practicing my hammer-ons, and then Mike would come in a little annoyed, but tolerating it. So now, I have my own bass, and it was a short scale Hohner that I wish I still owned. And once, I had that, it was sort of on, that's about that age. I was maybe around 12 or something, that magical Michel Gondry age. Yeah. And he, and right around that time, the biggest thing in my life was Black Sabbath. So though I feel like my Paul McCartney is my deepest bass spirit, because, it's sort of more how I think nowadays. I don't really write. I write more Beatlesy if left to my own accord. It just sort of happens that way. I don't really write Sabbathy so much, but just digging in and really embracing playing was my Geezer Butler years, and largely the Paranoid album, and the first 6, but very much Paranoid, like all that stuff, War Pigs. I could play all that stuff probably to this day, and it's really mobile, and it's comes from that whole Cream school of like improv, jazzy, bluesy bass. And I know that even early Sabbath is considered a little thuggish, and they aren't the highest caliber musicians, but they all had character. They were all super creative and inventive. The tunes are magnificent. So yeah, I'd cut my teeth on Geezer Butler and on my short scale Hohner bass.
Amazing. And what do you think? You mentioned a couple punk bands earlier. What was the first one that you kind of really gravitated towards that was kind of like your own?
Oh, well, it's sort of Mike and mine, and to a lesser extent, Chris, because what you have to remember is this is in the 70s. I'm only 2.5 years younger than my older brother, but Chris is almost 5 years younger than me. So, at this age, Mike and I are still pretty young. We're like 11 or whatever. Chris is really young. He's still playing with, plastic dinosaur toys and stuff. And he's sort of into the stuff we're into, but he's not quite old enough to forge his own musical tastes, to really get his hands on the instrument and make a go of it, which, when he caught up to that same age group as us, the exact same thing went down. He really springboarded into his taste. See, all three of us we dig each other's stuff, but we have our own directions within the overall arc of rock music.
Yeah.
And once well, anyway, back to that. I've told this story before, but my dad was watching the news in the basement in Maryland when we were kids. And this is 1977, I guess. And on comes a little news blurb about this social threat called punk rock sweeping across England. And in the inset, they've got this inset photo of Johnny Rotten, John Lydon, and they've sort of airbrushed flames superficially around him, I suppose, to exaggerate the menace. And as they're talking about this phenomena that involves safety pins through skin and all this craziness, cutting yourself, my older brother and I, we sort of shoot each other a look. We look at each other like, okay, what's this? Because at that point, we were very much into our Beatles, Stones, Grand Funk Railroad, David Bowie. We were into all this stuff, but it was a sort of a gradual thing. We were so young. There was no we were super into this thing, but we're sick of it and we're rejecting the old and embracing the new. We were way too young to look at things like that. And obviously we lived in, America where, labor disputes in England and class issues were of little concern or even awareness to us. We didn't know anything about what might be motivating this social movement. None of it. We just heard this. Well, first off, my brother Mike goes out and gets the Sex Pistols record, and we just loved it then, love it now. And it sort of opened the door to a few of these bands. Although, to be honest, we had those middle ground 70s Adam Rich kind of hairdos. We had never grown our hair long. We got into the Pistols, but pretty quickly discovered things like Sabbath and Zeppelin, and the hair started getting long. So we kind of went backwards from where culture, people slightly older than us, where culture was moving. Everyone was going punk or going new wave, but we were going early 70s. We were going Black Sabbath, Deep Purple. And so though we dug a lot of this stuff, we didn't take it on as a persona or a lifestyle in a sense. Yeah. And it's sort of interesting because about maybe 4 or 5 years later, by the time we were living in California, it sort of swept everyone like a wave. Everyone got into reggae. Well, that's the second record I ever bought with my own money was a Bob Marley record. I bought it for my dad, and that's the mid 70s. And, so not to pat our back that we were so ahead of the curve, but it's sort of all these things started becoming talking points. And I kind of felt yeah, we know, we got it. We got those records,
Yeah.
And dug a lot of this stuff. How could you not dig the Clash? How could you not dig the Jam? Especially the Damned. Those are some of those early records like Machine Gun Etiquette, the first album, the Black Album. Those are some of my all-time favorite records.
Yeah.
And great playing, great stuff. So it's interesting how that all unfolded because we didn't really embrace it in a linear kind of straight ahead way. It's sort of like early MTV that used to play everything all at once. That's kind of what we were like as kids. We'd think nothing of listening to a Linda Ronstadt record and then putting on a Sex Pistols record,
Yeah. I actually
and still don't,
Yeah. Oh, now even more probably. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a couple days ago, I just had Glenn Matlock on the show.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
It's one of I imagine that was fucking great. Pardon my F-bomb again. But, it's funny. I always get peeved because even toward the end of when there were record stores, in the late 90s and early 2000s, I'd oftentimes find the Pistols in the pop rock soul section, even if the store had a punk section, because it was somebody's way of thumbing their nose like they were the Bay City Rollers or something. And I always like to point out that they were no more manufactured as people. Everyone has to get introduced to someone. People introduced me to Face to Face. That doesn't make me a fake human whose efforts are disingenuous. And other things do that, but I'm just kidding. Same with the other guys. And, it's funny because Bernard Rhodes, I believe, was the one that introduced John Lydon to the rest of the Pistols. He also introduced Joe Strummer to the rest of the Clash. So, I always kind of like to point out, if you're going to call them a boy band for that, the Pistols, then you kind of got to do that with the Clash. And that usually shuts it down because nobody wants to talk smack about the Clash.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, every Clash is like it's untouchable.
Sacrosanct. Yeah, it's sacrosanct. I saw them on the Combat Rock tour in '82, and unfortunately, I just missed them with Topper Head, and I really wish I could have seen them with Topper on drums. But Terry Chimes, their original drummer, was back in the fold for that tour, and it was really cool. I'm glad I got to see them before all that cut the crap stuff, and it was the end of the run pretty much, but at least I made it across the finish line.
I guess you were way too young to see the Pistols.
Oh yeah, of course. I was too young. Well, not just too young, but too kind of stupid and lazy to see a lot of stuff. Yeah. Because it kind of had to land on my doorstep or even on my head for me to be aware of it. I know a lot of people, they were like thumbing through the Independent to see what gigs are going to be in LA and buying tickets. Number one, never had any money, never had a car. So it was usually like, a buddy of mine's mom wrote for the Santa Barbara Independent. So she was able to periodically get us tickets for gigs that came to town. So I saw like the first real rock gig I ever saw was the Kinks at the County Bowl up in Santa Barbara. And that was in 1979. And then the next year I wound up seeing, Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, Jeff Beck. It started to, really open up to seeing concerts, but it usually had to be like with an older person that had a car or could like somehow get me tickets,
Yeah.
Somebody gave me a ticket to see AC/DC on the For Those About to Rock tour, and I still have the unused ticket. I just simply couldn't get to LA. I look back on that now and I think, why couldn't you have just walked to Los Angeles? You could have seen them, obviously not with Bon Scott, but during, some really kind of prime years. And what the hell's the matter with you?
Yeah.
So I missed Randy Rhoads. I missed a lot of stuff, and I know it showed up in LA. I don't even remember missing it. That's how kind of clueless little skateboard kid, pimply faced, long-haired, greasy Black Sabbath skateboard kid I was.
How was that King show? I had Dave Davies on the show too. He's older now, but it was fun to talk to that guy.
Oh God, I can imagine. I follow him on the gram, and I'm just happy to see these guys happy, even if they're too old to rock and roll the way they once did. I don't care. The reality is this thing we glom onto is so ephemeral. If a individual or a pair of people or a group of people get together and make one thing that moves me in some kind of positive way, however superficial or deep, that's a hell of a thing to have happen in existence at all. Yeah. Let alone a whole record, let alone like 5 or 8 records in a row. That's astronomical when you get up to that. So, those who've served and did so magnificently, whether they got rich or famous, I tip my hat and I say thank you so much. And you enriched my life deeply, as much as some of these people nobody knows about, and obviously some of it's people like the Beatles that everyone is aware of. But when you're being moved in a positive way by something, that's the good stuff, and that's ultimately what matters. And life and time renders us all equally and with as much indifference and cruelty. So I don't begrudge that people can't do what they once did. Yep. Music, even if it isn't rock and roll, is a highly physical act. It requires your body machine to be in great shape, and time just has a way of taking that away. So Linda Ronstadt can't sing anymore, and I feel bad for her, but she gave us so many records, and no one gets out alive. Yeah. Sorry to get all moribund. Hey everyone, this is Scott Shiflett from Face to Face, and we're hanging out on Cone's Cave.
Yes, this is Cone's Cave. I'm Cone from Sum 41. Thanks for tuning in. You're hearing the conversation I had with Scott Shiflett, fellow bass player from Face to Face. Well-spoken man, knows what he's talking about. Let's get right back into it, and we're going to talk about some songs, Face to Face songs, and I, of course, wanted to know about some of his bass parts that I've loved for so many years. Here we go.
We should talk. I want to talk a couple songs. I'm gonna start with a Face-to-Face song, and then we'll move backwards.
I don't remember that one.
What's that?
No, I was just preparing in advance to not know the song.
Oh,
Whenever
you'll
you say it, I'll still.
You'll know this one for sure.
Oh dear.
But I'm sure you know that like Face to Face was the first band to ever take Sum 41 on tour across America. I think
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. I was in the band.
Oh yeah, you were.
We were, not to digress for a second, but we were a launching pad, or not necessarily a launching pad. I'm sure these bands were already well on their way and had great trajectory, but it almost seemed like opening for our band was like the fuse that so many bands had right before they hit it big, and all the way to the point where we joked that we should form a new band, open for ourselves on our farewell tour, and then do much better with this new project. And always seemed to be the case. I'm stoked for that. And I remember that tour, and you guys were total kids, man. You were young. You were youngsters, but you were really sweet, cool, friendly guys. And honestly, that's always been the best. It's rare that we get paired off with defensive or hostile kind of jerks, but it has happened. We've had people just come right out of the gate kind of hating us or resenting us or judging us for one reason or another. And, I always enter every situation just right out of the gate, friendly, accommodating, nice to meet you, and just hope it goes nice from there.
Yeah. No, I remember that tour. It was great. And, New Found Glory was on it. We were first. And I think it was New Found Glory Saves the Day. And then you guys.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again, I guess New Found Glory kind of had their moment after that too. So yeah, I think right. But I want to
honestly, I don't know the degree, but Saves the Day had a hot little run as well.
Yeah.
I hate to I don't mean to sound demeaning or belittling. I don't know. I just don't pay attention. I swear I live in the past, man. I live in my old record collections. I'm totally unaware. Any one of these bands could be filling the Staples Center tonight. I wouldn't entirely know. So anyway, where's my invite?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, so that tour was in 2000. So I remember this tour so good, and like you had Reactionary out that year. So I distinctly remember every time I don't know what you guys opened with, but I remember Disappointed you guys always played, and going back to that bass playing and Busy Bass.
Yeah.
I love that intro, and I love that song.
Cool.
Do you remember like when you guys wrote that? That song. What it's about?
Well, it's simple. I wrote pretty much all the music to that song, and when I brought it to the band, Trevor Trevor was interested, because as my songwriting partner, we essentially, after the self-titled record, I became, pretty much a prominent co-writer of everything with Trevor. Yeah. And so I brought I came in on the self-titled album and I might have added a couple things to Trevor songs, but that's a pretty much 100% Trevor write. And then I wrote a ton of Ignorance that everyone got so upset about. And that was me bringing all my classic rock and Beatles influences. And I'm sure that I felt a little guilt about it, but everyone seemed to be blaming Pete. So I just stood off to the side and let that happen. Sorry, bud. And, but when we decided to do Reactionary, we basically wanted to try and kind of do something a little bit more in the vein of Face to Face, a little more hard hitting. Even though, oddly enough, I when I hear that record now, I hear that like the songwriting is still a touch on the melancholy rock side, but I wrote the music for Disappointed because I had never really written anything kind of hard and a little pissed off and a little, Chad at first, our guitarist then, Chad he thought it was a little too metal, a little too Iron Maiden-y.
Oh, wow.
And I just didn't think of it that way at all. It just didn't matter. I'm like, well, Resignation is a pretty aggressive minor key song from that other record. And, I kind of got used to the idea that we need a few signature kind of kick-ass bass licks to honor the Matt Riddle in the ghost of this band. And so, I was a little surprised. Trevor wanted to do it, but he came up with some great vocals for it. That song was a monster to play. It still is. We almost never do it. It's kind of like that lick is just low enough on the neck, and I want to play it on the D and G string as opposed to the A and B string, just for, I don't know, tone or something. But it's a stretch, it hurts, it's exhausting, and all those whoa.
Yeah.
For some reason, that song is a monster to play, and I consider it one of a foursome. There is, I think it's Disconnected, Disappointed, Walk the Walk, and What's in a Name. Now, you could superimpose all those sort of signature riffs over each other, and I think that they're all hitting sort of similar accent points, though they're not playing the same lick. You know, one is doodle-doo, diddle-doo, doodle-doo, diddle-doo, and then you've got doodle-doo, diddle-doo, you know, I guess it's a little different, but they kind of, you know, give it that a sort of intricate driving bass lick is the meat or foundation, and the guitars kind of create a chordal, the tonal shift, almost backing it up.
I remember you guys playing it, and I just was always like in awe of that bass line at the beginning.
Yeah, that one hurt then. I assume it would hurt now. I think we just don't play it very often, and I applaud Trevor for not forcing that one back in the set.
Let's talk a little 22 Jacks.
Oh wow, yeah, that
you're a part of the Uncle Bob album, right?
Yes. Let's see. Joe Sib was an in and out roommate for a while, and a real good friend of my former roommate and bandmate and Side One Dummy co-conspirator Bill Armstrong, who is still a great friend to this day. So when he had his falling out, when Joe had his falling out with Wax, we just as sort of peripheral buds wanted to. He was mostly my little brother's friend, but he was we were all hanging out together, and I play bass. He needs some help putting a new thing together for a new band, and we all just sort of rallied behind him. And it was Jason Cropper, who was ex-Weezer at that point, and Steve Soto and Sandy Hansen, who I think were adolescents. I think Sandy was also, and me, and And we just all sort of, I didn't write a thing on that record, but it was a lot of fun to make. And it was sort of like we made that record. When I was still working full time, when I first joined Face to Face, and I was like doing 3 or 4 nights a week with either the 22 Jacks or 3 or 4 nights a week with Face to Face, depending on, we were rehearsing and the self-titled material with Face, and then we were recording and rehearsing the 22 Jacks record. So I was kind of doing those simultaneously and working a full-time job at that point, which was exhausting. But, the thing was, at the time, 22 Jacks was not an up and running entity. It was a bunch of friends rallying behind a friend to try and get him what we considered, like, we wanted to make a great record in the vein of like the first Specials album or Joe Jackson's Look Sharp. It isn't necessarily a punk record, but it's kind of like got that like post-punk energy and sound and sort of make a classic record. I think they wrote some great songs. And I'm still, I haven't listened to it in 100 years, but I'm proud of it and glad we made it. And it's, I think, the only record I ever made with Steve Soto, so that has a sentimental element for me. And so yeah, I'm proud of that time, but it was definitely exhausting trying to do both things at once.
I bet. Yeah, no, I remember hearing it in high school, I believe, and then I listened to it a little bit, and I just revisited it today. And I remember "So Sorry." That was the song that I remember hearing in high school.
Cool.
Kind of like the hit of the album, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's catchy. Great song.
It is, yeah.
So sorry, why worry? Anything can happen now. Stars rust out and I know how. So sorry, why worry? Anything can happen now. Stars rust out and I know how.
There's a little bit of So Sorry by the band 22 Jacks, in which my guest Scott Shiflett from Face to Face played on. This is Cone's Cave. I'm Cone from Sum 41. You just heard my conversation with bassist of Face to Face, Scott Shiflett. And I will be right back. All right, this is Cone's Cave. I'm Cone from Sum 41. This is my show on iDoby Radio every Monday. Well, at least for the next 8 weeks, because my season runs 8 episodes. And this is episode 1 of season 5. So I'll be here for the next 8 weeks on Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I want to thank my guest, Scott Shiflett of Face to Face, fellow bassist and insane bass player. If you ever get a chance to watch Scott play bass, I say do it. It is something. He is amazing. They just did a bunch of those No Effects farewell shows, and I caught them then. And he's just as good now as I remember him back 25 years ago on our first U.S. tour. The guy is a monster on the bass. Thank you, Scott, for coming on the show. Face to Face has such a great catalog of music. Go check out some Face to Face. All right, I'm going to run. Thank you to iDoby Radio for having Cone's Cave on their show. I will be back next Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I got to go.